Last Sunday morning, I woke up, had breakfast, and dressed for church. I felt fine. I taught Bible class. I felt fine. I preached. I felt fine. I had lunch at Texas Avenue Cafe. I felt fine. Well, I felt fine until I was almost through eating, and then I wasn't feeling so fine. And by the time we left the cafe, I had Debbie drive us home. That's how unfine I was feeling. As the afternoon progressed, I felt worse. The stomach bug had hit full force. I spent the afternoon and evening either on the bed or in the bathroom. Sunday evening, Debbie told me that the bug had hit her. Well, early Monday morning, if you're sleeping all day, getting up and down, I think I got up fairly early because I was kind of slept out. But I was starting to feel a little better. Debbie had prepared a 7-Up for me in a sippy cup and left it up next to the chair, and I never had gotten to it. That lukewarm, tepid, flat 7-Up tasted great. In fact, breakfast time came, I had another 7-Up. Well, by lunchtime, Debbie and I were starting to feel better, and we were able to eat some toast. It was solar eclipse day. Now, are you going to let are you going to let a stomach bug keep you from seeing a once-in-a-lifetime event? Well, we were in good enough shape that as the time came, the countdown was almost over. We had our glasses. We had moon pies, but we didn't feel like eating them. We finally ate one of them yesterday. We traveled all the way out to our driveway. Those camp chairs sure came in handy. I wouldn't have wanted to have had to stand through the eclipse in my condition. Debbie either. We watched the moon slowly move in front of the sun. The cloud cover came and went. Totality arrived. The clouds parted. We looked at the sun without glasses. And oh, what a marvelous demonstration of God's design we witnessed. It was truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And then totality was over. The glasses were necessary again. Didn't watch quite as long, the moon moving away from the sun. Well, in the days and weeks ahead of the eclipse, there were numerous warnings. Do not look at the sun. It will do permanent damage. Well, all of those warnings not to look at the sun seemed unnecessary to me. I don't remember where I first heard it, but I knew you don't look at the sun. It's kind of like some advice Dad gave me about some things to do or not to do. As a very young boy, he said, never touch a telephone pole. That was back in the days when those things were lathered in creosote. I don't know whether he'd had a first-hand experience with this or not, but apparently if you get that on you, it can burn. Well, I assure you, I never came in touching distance of a telephone pole. I heeded that warning. And the warning about the sun I had a long time ago, and so there was absolutely no temptation to sneak a peek at the sun without the glasses. Well, I'm glad I was in the right place, the right time, to witness such a great event. And I give the praise not to Mother Nature, but to our Father God. We saw in the eclipse a part of God's grand design for our universe. We knew when that eclipse was going to occur. Why? Because of God's design. We have the sun each day. We have nighttime. It all works as God made it. Well, I'm not real sure what the news will give their attention to next. Oh, actually, I'm kind of afraid it's probably going to be an election. Today's Tidbits article included a quote by Philip Slate, my mentor and friend. He commented, "While these solar events are interesting to see, I'm more concerned about the things that eclipse the sun, S-O-N, aren't you? People allow all kinds of things to eclipse Christ when it comes to the use of their money and time, their ethical behavior, and many other things." Philip, as always, makes a good point. So much attention was paid to the eclipse on Monday. People traveled great distances to get into the area where they could see the totality. A businessman who had a lot of money flew himself and 40 of his family and friends to Waco to witness the eclipse. And when he found out it was going to be cloudy, he checked where the skies would be clear, and he flew them all to Utah. That's giving a whole lot of attention to an event that is not as important. It was a great thing to see, but as Philip said, there are things that are more important. Jesus is more important. In the 1970s, I watched reruns of Star Trek, the real Star Trek, the original series. One episode was entitled Bread and Circuses. By the way, this is the first time that I can remember ever referring to Star Trek in a sermon, probably the last. But this episode was Bread and Circuses. It involved Kirk and Spock and the others going to this planet where they encountered kind of a modern-day Roman Empire. They had the gladiators, had the fights and all those kind of things going on. Now folks could stay at home and watch them on television. But of course, Kirk and his cohorts got caught up in all of this. And they finally won the day, got back to the Enterprise. And as they're back on the Enterprise, Spock expresses surprise at a sun-worshiping cult preaching universal brotherhood, opining that sun worship was primitive superstition with no such philosophy behind it. Sun worship. Lieutenant Uhura, having monitored the planet's communications all this time, had the answer. She says it's not the sun up in the sky, it's the Son of God. Well, Captain Kirk is astonished. And he says, Caesar and Christ, they had them both. And the word is spreading only now. We do not worship the sun in the sky. Some people do. We worship the Son who's now in heaven, reigning at the right hand of God. We worship the S-O-N, the Son of God. In the first century, the book of Hebrews was written to Christians who were considering leaving the faith. These were second and third generation Christians. These folks had grown up in the church, so to speak. Perhaps persecution had come along. Perhaps it was simply forces attracting them away from Christ. But they are thinking about rejecting Jesus and going back to Judaism, back to some other system. And so Hebrews is basically a written sermon, urging them not to do that, urging them to stay with Jesus. And the point is made, Jesus is superior in every way. Superior to the old Jewish religion. He's a better priest. He's a better sacrifice. We have a better covenant. He's better in every way. And so why would you leave the best for something inferior? I want to look at 3 texts from Hebrews. And these 3 texts emphasize the importance of keeping our eyes, our thoughts on Jesus. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 9. But we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. We see Jesus. Now, perhaps the temptation for the recipients of Hebrews, some of them I think are thinking about going back to the Old Covenant, to the law of Moses. Moses was a great figure to the Jewish people, and he was a very good man. But the writer points out, when you look at Jesus, yes, for a little while he was made lower than the angels. Now he has been crowned with glory and honor. And that's because he suffered death. He died on the cross. That enabled the grace of God to save us. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. The writer makes the case. Jesus is superior in every way. You must not leave the best for what is inferior. Chapter 12 follows that great chapter of the faith, Faith Hall of Fame, chapter 11, where the writer talks about different ones who had faith. And then he says, therefore, considering those great individuals of faith, keep in mind that you're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. Perhaps the picture we can draw is of a great stadium, in the stands cheering us on, are Abraham, Moses, other great heroes of the faith down through the centuries. We might even extend that now. Paul, Peter, John. We might even extend it. I don't think we would do an injustice to think of the Christian mother, the Christian father, the Christian grandparents, now with the Lord. But the picture of them is that they are in the stands cheering us on. And the writer says, since we're surrounded by that great cloud of witnesses, let us put aside every weight and the sin which clings to us so closely. In physical therapy, when they think you're getting comfortable just doing the exercises without any added weight, they add weight to it. Well, the runners preparing for a race might put on some weight. That would help them build more endurance. But at race time, that was all gone. We need to lay aside anything and everything that would keep us from running the spiritual race. That includes sin. And then we need to run with endurance that race that is set before us. And notice as we run the race, what we must do. We must look to Jesus. Another translation says, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Jesus is the one who originated, the one who completed our faith. He endured the cross for us, now seated at the right hand of God. And then Hebrews chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Therefore, holy brothers, you who share in a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession, who was faithful to him who appointed him, just as Moses was also faithful in all God's house. For Jesus has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses. As much more glory as the builder of a house has more honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant, to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. But Christ is faithful over God's house as a son. And we are his house, if indeed we hold fast our confidence and our boasting and our hope. Again, Jesus is to be the focus. One translation says, fix your thoughts on Jesus. And these words are an exhortation based upon the previous section. Because Jesus is the exalted Son who is greater than the angels, but made himself lower than the angels, focus your attention on him. He is God's faithful Son. He is further identified as an apostle as well as a high priest. The idea of one who was sent, an apostle, is closely connected to the champion or leader, where those who are sent are leaders. The Son was sent as the leader. Jesus is the leader. He is a champion among God's people, among brothers. Fix your thoughts on Jesus. Keep your eyes on Jesus. The book of Hebrews, writing to Christians, the author writing to Christians who are thinking about leaving Jesus and going to something so inferior. Jesus is the Savior. Only Jesus can give salvation. Why would we leave Jesus for something inferior? But people do. J. Wilbur Chapman said, "My life is governed by this rule. Anything that dims my vision of Christ, or takes away my taste for Bible study, or cramps my prayer life, or makes Christian work difficult is wrong for me, and I must, as a Christian, turn away from it." The Christians addressed in Hebrews were having those things calling them away from Christ. And ever since the church was established, Satan has been using different means to call us away from Jesus, to take us to something inferior, to something that will keep us from serving Jesus and being saved. As a nation, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus. As a community, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus. As a family, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus. As individuals, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus. And as a church, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus. In my March 24th bulletin, I mentioned Bob Lashley, Richard Williams that we know and love, has a brother, Charles. Charles has a daughter named Judy. Judy met Bob Lashley at Oklahoma Christian in the 1970s, and they married. In the bulletin article, I mentioned that Bob had cancer, and I asked for prayers. I met Bob Lashley 56 years ago, I think it is, 1968. I was living in southeastern Oklahoma. We had a prom alternative. We had a banquet, had an after-dinner speaker, and our entertainment was Bob Lashley, his brother and his sister. They were the Lashley Trio. They lived in Muskogee up in northeast Oklahoma. But they and their preacher, Bud Tibbles, had come down. Bud was the after-dinner speaker. They were the entertainment. Well, it wasn't known at the time, at least as far as I know, but by the fall, we had moved to Tahlequah up in northeastern Oklahoma, 30 miles from Muskogee. The Lashley Trio were the standard entertainment at all of our youth rallies, and we had about one a month. And when I saw Bob there in northeastern Oklahoma, I was like, "What are you doing up here?" Well, we moved. So I saw Bob on a regular basis, as well as his siblings. We were, I think, in the same graduation year from high school. We ended up at Oklahoma Christian at the same time. Ran into him over the years as we visited Oklahoma Christian. His uncle-in-law, Richard, had called to tell me that he had cancer. And it was posted on Facebook. And it was posted that he'd been put on hospice, that he'd been sent home from the hospital. While we were watching the eclipse, or getting ready to watch the eclipse, the message came over on Facebook that Bob had gone home to his Lord. Bob Lashley did not see the eclipse, but on Monday, he saw the sun.